President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged men to play their part in helping to fight the scourge of gender-based violence. Ramaphosa was addressing the AU Third Men's Conference on Positive Masculinity and Leadership to End Violence Against Women and Girls. South Africa and the Comoros are co-hosting the two-day conference, which began yesterday.
We seek a world in which every African man, woman, and child can live in true freedom and equality with their rights respected, upheld, and advanced. We know that such a world is within our reach if we focus on the prevention of all forms of violence against women and children and girls. We cannot realize a society free of violence against women and girls without critically interrogating what one could call the assumptions around patriarchy, around male chauvinism and sexism. It is these assumptions, and in some cases traditions, that lead young men and boys to believe that women are property, that they are worth less than themselves as men, and that they are deserving of ill treatment. This is a conversation that men need to have. And I'm glad that at this conference and the past few summits that have been held, 2 summits, these discussions and conversations are going on. Men in the main are the perpetrators of violence against women and girls. At the same time, it is men who have the power to bring about the change that we so need in society. They have the power, and we must focus on unleashing that power that the men have, because they are the perpetrators.
For more on this story, we cross to SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo, who's at that event in Pretoria. Kaya, so the president struggled at first with the mic. He then got his message across. Just tell us more about what he and other speakers are saying today.
Well, that's right, Francis. So the president really making a clarion call to the male figures in South Africa, across the continent, to be at the forefront in combating the scourge of gender-based violence, but also really just insisting that the issue of positive masculinity is very important in terms of really just tackling some of these societal challenges that continue to haunt countries like South Africa and many other countries in the African continent. So this is one of the most important platforms where also so many leaders have spoken about these commitments of making sure that the continent is able to make quite strides in this regard. But quite a number of people are also in attendance, the lobby groups as well. In fact, let's speak to Mr. Sitole, one of the participants. Yes, we're just talking about the issue of fighting gender-based violence in South Africa, in the African continent. We heard from the president also raising the issue of equal pay, irrespective of your gender.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Khumalo. Indeed, when the president was making his speech, he mentioned that women should also receive equal pay as a man. So that is another first positive step in the fight against gender-based violence in a workplace now. Remember, we learned another thing, that South Africa is not the only country who's suffering gender-based violence. Other countries are suffering child marriages. One of the speakers yesterday even mentioned that, in fact, it should not be called child marriage. It should be called straight rape. So this is what we are here for as men, to make sure we are being held accountable, so that whenever we move from this venue, we go there to the society and make sure that no one commits this gender-based violence.
Let's look at some of the tribal things that are associated with the culture. It also came quite strongly from the presidential address, where he said these are some of the issues that must be addressed, but also talking about the challenges that are posed by the toxic masculinity and the issue of really just bringing to the fore the positive masculinity. How do we learn from here, especially because we talk about this AU convention and ending violence against women and girls? Can we make strides? Because when you look on the ground, the challenge is quite huge out there.
Yes, indeed. One of those things that the president raised today in his speech, he said this requires lots of funds for this work to be made possible. And moving so, it happened that one of the speakers yesterday mentioned that the whole purpose of this thing is to review what was happening in the past conferences, whereby in Kinshasa and Comoros, the last conference that took place, now being hosted by South Africa. So indeed, I'm glad, as part of someone from the ground, an activist against gender-based violence, to say this matter is taken serious by the continent, African continent. We also saw some leaders, traditional leaders amongst us here, making a commitment. One of the speakers even mentioned pantsing amablessa pantsi, down with blessers down. So that tells you, because you can't leave the traditional leaders in the fight against gender-based violence, because most of the times these actions are done, some of them they are done out of traditional leadership to say, we are doing this thing because of it's our tradition. So now it needs to be traditional leaders are brought to the forefront in the fight against GBV. So they are standing in solidarity to say no to gender-based violence and femicide.
And just before I let you go, Mr. Sithole, what do you say to that lady who's battling with this problem? Maybe intimate partner, they are experiencing this very terrible situation. What's just a very good step in terms of tackling this, especially also from the males as well? How do we start in making sure that we become very valuable partners, so to speak, in this journey? Just briefly.
This is how I view it personally. It's a psychological problem. So if a person slaps you once, that is enough for you to leave that house, because a slap might lead to your death. So it's better for you to live while you are still alive than remaining in that relationship and come out in a coffin. So the best way, one slap, it's enough.
All right, Mr. Stoller, thank you so much indeed for that. So, Francis, that's one of the participants here. And something that is quite important in this regard as well, there has been a commitment from President Cyril Ramaphosa that at the upcoming African Union Summit next year, there'll be very clear events to try and galvanize support in making sure that they do adopt the policies, but also other heads of states do hear about the outcomes from the Pretoria gathering here in terms of the key decisions that have been taken.